Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Kerrie Jordan. Welcome to our show where we hear from manufacturing and supply chain leaders who are transforming the future of these great industries. Now, today I'm speaking with Justin Brown, the Chief Supply Chain Officer at Dollar Shave Club, which is a leading personal grooming and subscription-based e-commerce company that revolutionized the razor industry. You've probably heard of them. They're founded in 2011. They're headquartered in Marina del Rey, California. The company disrupted the market with direct-to-consumer models, offering high-quality razors and grooming products at affordable prices through a convenient subscription service. Now, in 2016, Dollar Shave Club was acquired by Unilever for $1 billion, strengthening its position in the grooming industry, and more recently was divested and now owned by Nexus Capital Management, which has further positioned the organization for growth. Now, my guest, Justin Brown, leads the company's end-to-end supply chain operations. He has a strong emphasis on enhancing customer experience. He's been instrumental in optimizing procurement, production, distribution processes, ensuring efficient operations, and timely product delivery. So under his leadership, it's interesting. We're going to hear about how the company successfully navigated complex challenges and built supply chain diversification and automation. And this really helped Dollar Shave Club reinforce its position as a leader in the personal grooming industry. So I'm excited to speak with Justin today. We're going to dig into this business model creativity and supply chain innovation. Justin, welcome, and thank you for joining the show.
Thank you, Kerrie. That was quite the introduction. I appreciate that. I am happy to be here. Excited to have a chat with you.
Wonderful. Great. Let's get started. Would you share a bit about your background and what led you to your current role at Dollar Shave Club?
Sure. So to start, I'll say I would consider myself to be a bit of a supply chain lifer. It's something where, I have my degree from the University of Tennessee in supply chain management, started working for Unilever right out of school as an entry-level supply chain analyst role, and have been in the field ever since. I've had a variety of roles across what I consider the 4-lane supply chain highway. When you think about plan, source, make, deliver, spent time in a lot of demand supply planning roles, customer supply chain, fulfillment, logistics, spent time in manufacturing, warehousing as well. And really for the first 13 years of my career, like I said, I did spend my time with Unilever. Took a turn a bit and decided to lead the organization and joined SC Johnson for a while, where I led the supply chain innovation process for their air care category, not to be confused with hair care. Air care would be, if you think of Glade as a brand, so Glade candles, aerosols, things that nature sense for the home. Led innovation planning for that, and then moved on to actually run their entire North American planning organization for a while, based out of Chicago, before I ended up taking a role at Dollar Shave Club. And it's interesting in the way that I found myself there, because as you mentioned, Unilever acquired Dollar Shave Club before my time. However, in a roundabout way, one of my old bosses from Unilever actually reached out to me, who had since moved into a role at Dollar Shave Club, and asked me if I would be interested in joining the team there to run their supply chain operations organization at the time, for a role that was based in California, to which my initial reaction was absolutely not. Moving to California at the time for me seemed like considering moving to a foreign country, given that, I had spent all of my time growing up on the eastern side of the US and really had never considered living out here. But obviously took the plunge, and it's been the best career decision I've made, quite frankly. And I love living out here in LA. It's actually an amazing place to live. And so that's kind of how I ended up here. And in terms of how I ended up in the role specifically, so as I mentioned, I came in to run supply chain operations, which was really specific to planning and fulfillment logistics operations. That's how we structured it. But I joke with my old boss that the best career development he ever provided for me was leaving, right? And so he actually ended up leaving the organization, took another role, and I was able to move into this role and then even expand it a little bit beyond the previous scope that it was. So it's been a great ride. It's been a really, really enjoyable time, and we've done a lot, which I'm happy and excited to talk a little bit more to you about. But yeah, that's my story.
Excellent. Would you share a bit about Dollar Shave Club as an organization? Because I think a lot of us have heard of it. We've definitely seen the videos, and you have this direct-to-consumer model, and I'm sure that that's had an impact on supply chain management. Would you talk a bit about the business model and how you see supply chain?
Absolutely. So the direct consumer model, obviously provides its own unique set of challenges and opportunities. And, it's becoming more and more prevalent in our industry today. And so I can talk a little bit about some of the focus areas for us and what's the most important and where we focus our efforts and resources specifically to continue to drive cost out of the system, create value for the company, and most importantly, create the best experience for our customers. But when we think about the journey, my journey in particular, so I've been here about 6 years now. And when I came on board, we were truly the e-commerce giant that we were back in the day from the razor industry. We had disrupted the industry. Before Dollar Shave Club was around, there really wasn't any direct consumer. There really wasn't any subscription-based models for the razor industry in particular. And quite frankly, everything was incredibly expensive. If you remember those days, things were locked up in, the glass cages at the stores. And, because, a 4-pack of razors was like $30 or something. And so we came onto the scene and offered like an $8 pack, or even obviously in the very early days, dollar razors, and you could order them and get them directly shipped to your door, which was incredibly convenient. So it really disrupted the industry. Fast forward to now, and, you see significant players in the industry now alongside of us in that direct consumer subscription based model. So Harry's is there, Gillette is there, Schick is there, right? So it's become incredibly crowded, and we kind of set the trend, but now it's important for us to continue to find ways to differentiate and continue to make that business model profitable and prepared for growth in the future. Beyond just the direct consumer side, we've also since launched into retail. So in my time, it was about the first year and a half after I joined, we had actually expanded beyond direct consumer and did launch into Walmart, Target, and all the big box retailers where we still are today. So truly expanding into an omni-channel business, because that's where continued growth remains. And I do believe, and we also obviously believe as an organization, that you have to meet customers everywhere they are in terms of where they shop. So being online, having a significant presence there, being in store, being on Amazon, quite frankly, there's a significant amount of volume there as well. And so we wanted to just expand to meet customers where they are and meet the best possible service for them. But going back to the direct consumer side, how does, when you think back to 20 years ago, and direct consumer e-commerce wasn't as significant, obviously, as it is today. I mean, it's very prevalent, but it's also incredibly expensive as a supply chain model. And if you think about that, in contrast to the retail side of the business, you have cost centers everywhere that you have to make sure you're focusing on and optimizing. But for direct consumer, thinking about the last mile shipping element, thinking about shipping costs in general, and for a company like us who ship orders where an average value of that order may only be $7 or $8. And the cost of shipping through either UPS, FedEx, the Postal Service, whatever, you think about that could run you $3, $4, $5 per order, in addition to the cost of goods, in addition to your overheads that you're covering. So when you think about shipping in general, it's an incredibly expensive proposition that you have to really assess, how can I continue to improve operations, take cost out, drive value, look at different solutions, different technology, different providers to help me continue to really manage it in a way that you can reduce costs where possible, but still give customers what they want, which is immediate deliveries. It's almost a make to order type business. And so it's been an interesting ride and rife with challenges, but we've really found some ways to benefit our business and continue to grow within that space.
Yes. Okay. So great story. Thank you for sharing that. It is interesting to see the way that has evolved over time. And to your point, needing to meet the consumer where they are. And already, like manufacturing, distribution, supply chain, these are tight margins. So, the focus on cost is really interesting. You've had to over the years. Now, if I could ask you about technology, because on the show, we like to explore different technologies across, the supply chain, across manufacturing, distribution. What sort of technologies have you been investing in order to maybe drive better visibility into costs, to improve shipping decisions? What sort of technologies are you looking to use within your supply chain?
We've looked at a lot of things. And honestly, when I think about the digital transformation that a lot of organizations go through, and quite frankly, never really stop assessing how the next phase will look. For us, we've really invested, in my time specifically, in improvement in systems around demand and supply planning and inventory management. When I go back and think about the history of my experience through Unilever, through SEJ, much bigger organizations, obviously, massive amounts of people, massive amounts of cost and process. And so you're spending a lot of money on very big systems that can manage an ERP in an effective way. And it also can manage your order to cash process, your inventory management, supply, material planning, demand planning. But inevitably, they're usually quite expensive. And so when we think about a business like Dollar Shave Club, we're a bit smaller, right? We're a bit more nimble. Our SKU count's not as complex. We don't have, thousands of people in the organization. So something for us that can help drive improvement in process and automation and efficiency is important, but I'm not going to spend $1 million on an SAP module necessarily, right? So fast forward to today, there are so many SaaS-based solutions for planning tools, as an example, which helps automate and make smarter decisions through whether it's machine learning or some of these new AI platforms that are coming out. And so we've really invested in some of those in the not so distant past that has really helped us drive a significant improvement in our inventory management, resource allocation. So that's really from the planning side. From a customer engagement approach, we've also looked, and this is where AI is a significant impact in the market today in the industry. It's on everybody's mind. It's in every conference you go to, and there's a lot of applications, and sometimes it's overwhelming and confusing. But we've at least to this point honed in on an AI solution for our customer engagement operation, which allows us to be incredibly fast and cost effective in terms of how we talk to our customers. It's a unique part of our business in that because we are a direct to consumer e-commerce business, we have our own e-commerce platform. We are able to communicate with customers almost instantly, right? I mean, they can reach out to us if they have problems, if they have questions. We can reach out to them proactively when we want to assess, product formats, quality, participation in events, whatever. And so we've used an AI solution. It's actually a tool called Codif, and I'll give them a flag here because it's been great for us so far. That has taken labor out of the equation. That has allowed us to move from a more antiquated version of using just a simple chatbot and or even humans to take calls, take chats, take emails, and get back to customers, where we have an AI solution that can learn responses and learn quickly of what a customer might be looking at from some of the criteria that is being injected by the customer engagements. So basically, we're now a 24/7 operation. We can get back to customers incredibly quickly. We can improve the customer experience, and we've saved quite a bit of money by implementing a solution, by reducing the resources required to serve customers. And it's driving our CSAT scores, which is how we measure satisfaction, right, through customer engagement, dramatically up as well. So, and again, between the planning tools, between the Codif AI-enabled customer engagement tool, they're not crazy expensive. I mean, that's what's interesting with all the players that continue to come out every year in the industry is like you find, based on just the breadth of solutions and, quite frankly, competition, probably costs are actually quite optimal. They're quite interesting, and we've been able to leverage some pretty good deals. And so those are two areas. We've also, and I know I'm talking a lot about this, but there's also a solution we've found that also has been implemented in our fulfillment operation, which is where we manage the bulk of our e-commerce shipments, which for context, it's, call it 25, 30,000 orders a day that are all essentially packed and shipped in real time. It's a bit of a make to order business. And as I mentioned before, shipping is incredibly expensive. And so this isn't a new philosophy. I mean, rate shopping's been around for a while, but we've had some bolt-on, almost a TMS type solution specifically for the direct consumer business that allows us to very quickly differentiate between, based on zone, based on weight, based on zip code, like what would the best cost possibly be based on a number of providers that are out there that you have gone out and found relationships with. And it automatically saves us money because we know we're getting the best possible rate for that particular shipment at a very granular level, which, if you think about it, that's a lot of data to kind of crunch on a real-time basis. But it's a cool system that's allowed us to really continue to optimize shipping costs too. So those are just a handful of examples, but it's something, like I said, we're never done assessing what's next and what's the newest thing that can help us drive more cost and create more value for customers.
And if I could ask you why you started in these areas, because if I think about it, customer engagement could potentially be high risk if it goes wrong with the AI, right? And then as far as like the rate shopping to get the best possible price for shipping, you had already mentioned that, being a real focus area for your company. I think a lot of organizations and business leaders, when they're looking to invest in AI, there's a hesitancy to jump into these areas that could potentially, be high risk, but also high reward. How did you choose to go here?
Yeah, it's a great question. The shipping, if you do a cost Pareto, first and foremost, and you just say, okay, anytime you look at a focused improvement and exercise and you think about how can I drive cost out, you got to first of all assess like where are the biggest buckets to spend. So if I have an area that I'm interested in, but it only represents 1% or 2% of spend, maybe I shouldn't look at that first. versus shipping, which is, 30 to 40% of the total spend or whatever. So that's always going to attract our attention on the shipping side of things to continue to find areas to drive cost out where we can. And then, for us, like I mentioned before, we're small and a nimble organization, which is why it's one of the reasons I love working here is we can get things done quickly. We can make decisions easily. Quite frankly, it's my decision and I align with my CFO and CEO. And if we say, yeah, this makes sense, it's a good idea, we're going to do it. But we like to test and learn, right? And we're fast enough to be able to do that. So to your point, to manage the risk, we wouldn't go full bore with a solution before we're testing it in smaller instances or in smaller use cases first. And so we did that with the rate shopping software, and it seemed to be good. Same thing with the AI enabled customer engagement solution, because you're right. If you crash and burn that system, and you go offline or you go dark, and your customers can't get a hold of you, or not, it can spiral quickly, and customers are very vocal in the marketplace, and they'll let you know if they're not happy with what you're doing. And so the way we found Codif, though, I will be honest, is, we had relationships with them. We actually ended up finding them and connecting with them at a supply chain conference, a couple of years ago. And we got to talk, and they pitched their idea and thought it would be a good fit for us. And of course we agreed eventually, but it's all about small use case testing first. Right. And so, like, how can we look at just a subset, maybe a zip code or a region or a particular zone, and look at what that result is before we just go full on, and then, look at how it performs and then just take the plunge. And so far it's been a successful strategy, an obvious strategy. If, I'm sure a lot of people would think the same thing, but that's kind of how we approach it.
Now, this brings me to my next question around like measures of success. So when it comes to metrics for your supply chain, and even when you're looking at making investments, I love that you mentioned, kind of start small, experiment, and then you can scale it. When you're looking across your supply chain and making those decisions about bringing in new technologies or just making changes to your supply chain, what sort of metrics or measures of success do you use?
Yeah. So to clarify the question, so metrics of success in terms of a new solution, a new technology, a new platform that we're using, or just in general?
Do we do both? Because I'm curious about both. Because it's also like indications of when there's a need for a change in the supply chain. Maybe something has happened because some metric has triggered that, oh, this is an area experiencing some pain that we need to then go invest in a new solution. Just like generally measures of success, I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'll touch on both. And I like to think, it's probably true, that I over-index in keeping it simple, right? I love the acronym or the phrase, whatever. I learned it very early on at Unilever. It's the KISS standard, right? If you've heard of KISS, it's keep it simple, stupid. Mm-hmm. And I think it's something that I really just keep in the forefront of how I think about things. And so I don't overcomplicate, right? It's how are we doing on cost? And so where can we look to drive cost out? Whether someone comes and asks you like, hey, I think we're spending too much on shipping, go look at that. It's more about like, we have to constantly assess how we're doing as an organization on cost in supply chain and supply chain management, and continue to be on a proactive foot of getting the best solution or the best result we can and driving cost out. I mean, it's pretty obvious, I guess, but in today's environment with the macroeconomic climate globally, with tariffs and with certain geopolitical uncertainty, all of those things, right? It driving out costs and having options to continue to keep at the back of your mind of like, where is the next phase of driving cost out is first and foremost going to be what we focus on at all times. And so when I look at that, and there's others too, of course, like customer experience, I would argue is even more important than cost, but of course cost we have a lot of control on, but we're doing things to drive cost out as long as it's not at the expense of customer experience, because that can never be a sacrifice you make, to be clear. But when we think about solutions that, would be relevant for us to drive cost out, how do we validate? And then how do we measure success? First of all, to validate up front, the ROI has to make sense. Like I mentioned earlier, some of the solutions from the past, planning tools, ERPs, are pretty expensive. And, we are a pretty small and scrappy org. I've said that like 3 times now, I feel like. But, we've done well in the past. I will give the teams credit. We were an Excel-based demand and supply planning company as of like 5 years ago, which is crazy, right? But the teams were pretty good at it. I mean, our costs were okay. Our inventory was pretty good. Our service levels were good. So the justification of spending $500,000 or whatever on a new, automated, digitized planning module to advanced supply, it's hard to justify because it's like, okay, well, if I'm going to spend $500,000, where does that come back? How does that ROI pay back in 2 years? Are you going to reduce labor? Are you going to take that much inventory out? And so maybe, but it all comes down to the ROI for us is kind of what my point is on that. So even when we think about driving cost out and looking at solutions like Codif, it was a no-brainer because as long as the customer experience wasn't suffering, like we said, we tested and scaled in small doses first. The upfront cost and then the ongoing subscription cost was very meaningful for us compared to the annual return on investment back into the org of what we were able to reduce. It just made sense. And anyone listening is probably like, well, I mean, that's a basic ROI. Yes, but like that's the starting point. So if the ROI doesn't make sense, and for us, it's a little harder because even if an automated planning solution, as an example, the teams would love it because it's going to make their jobs easier and that's great. But if I have a planning team of 3 and I can't go down anybody and I can't really find a dramatic reduction in inventory or forecast accuracy or improved customer service, it's a challenge to justify it. But just as an example, but we've done it, and there have been enough improvements in the performance of some of these tools that it did make sense for us. But when I think about success factors, first and foremost, it's cost, and then it's service. So am I lowering inventory? Am I increasing the customer speed of delivery? Am I increasing customer satisfaction? Am I increasing customer service in terms of number of shipments? What's my case fill? Am I improving any of those things? And can I optimize resources to do it? It's really how we're assessing whether or not we should be looking at a particular tool. And so that's like from an upfront investment side of how we're assessing new solutions to drive improvement in our process, improvement in function, whatever. From a core just supply chain management standpoint, I mean, it's a similar type approach, but pretty simple. It's how are we doing on our costs? So cost per unit coming out of the fulfillment center. How are we doing on cost per order? How are we doing on labor management? How are we doing in our manufacturing costs coming out of our factory that makes all of our razors? So it's obviously around cost per unit, and are we optimizing and improving against targets? Service levels across case fill, speed of delivery, on time, in full to customers. How are we measuring customer engagement? But really, the customer and how they perceive us across all these measures is what is most important for us to assess whether or not we're being successful. But I mean, at a high level, and of course, there's all kinds of double clicks into those KPIs that we review on a monthly basis. But at its core, it's really around that cost and service metric that we look at most frequently.
For sure. I think it's interesting too that you emphasized the focus on ROI, cost, service, because I think while it sounds very obvious as we're, kind of talking through, or I think when you are, in it and thinking about the hype and the value of AI and you can lose sight of some of those more critical KPIs. So I think it's, really important to continue to go back to the fundamentals when you're making these kinds of major decisions. What really matters to the business? What are the core measures? And then how does it align? So that was really great that you talked through that. You also mentioned some of the macro, trends that are impacting your organization and supply chains in general. What are some of the macro trends that are impacting you and how?
So, to state the first obvious one, tariffs, right? The ongoing saga, right, that we're all living through. Those of us that have organizations, businesses with a global footprint like we do, we source materials and products out of China. But the tariff situation has been something that has really created a lot of work, a lot of focus for us. And so we're constantly assessing, how can we optimize our sourcing footprint to possibly get ahead of or avoid some of the implications? We do have some volume in the electric space beyond just what I would consider the non-disposable razor space. All of that comes out of China. And so partnering with suppliers there and looking at, do you have alternate supply locations that are not in China? And as it turns out, a handful of them do. So we're looking at alternate locations in Thailand as an example, or Korea, or even closer to the US market in Mexico. So we're constantly looking and assessing with our current supply base, what can we do to offset some of this together if it's not too far of a lift? Because it's one thing to say, sure, you have another site, but depending on the complexity of the products, and the lead times and the challenges and the costs. So you can't just pick something up out of China and say, okay, you should make it in Thailand tomorrow. There's obviously more to it than that. But we started to get ahead of this, 6, 8 months ago, as well as talking to new suppliers as we look at new products that we're, as we think about the next 3-year innovation horizon, we're looking at new suppliers as well that might be able to, position us better than just relying so heavily on China as one example. The other thing we've done is looked at, how can we insource more into our own factories? And we've looked at insourcing other technologies that weren't necessarily the core competency of that site when we first built it. So we've done some of that because we have some great engineers, quite frankly, that are really sharp, and they can come up with solutions to a lot of different things. Like we make razors. We said, well, why don't we make handles there too? Said, sure, we'll figure that out. So that's one of the solutions we did. And I'm sure a lot of companies are doing the same thing of assessing how can we insource more to not only get a better cost, but also to protect against some of these global uncertainties. If you have control, you got better certainty, I guess. The other thing is we've looked at other nearshoring suppliers on this side of the world, because like I said, our global demand, we are a global company, but 85-90% of the demand is in the US. And so we've moved some of the operations that are a bit more straightforward, like packaging and co-packing and things, to be closer to the US market to avoid some tariffs, even some in Mexico, which there's a tariff implication there too, but it's still based on labor, and optimization made sense for us. But we've been looking at this stuff for years, quite frankly. The tariff situation just expedited the urgency for us to start making some changes around insourcing, nearshoring, and then alternate supply strategies of different companies who may be able to help us. And again, it's unique to everybody's business. Some people may be locked in because of the nature of what they do. If you supply, straight steel to the US from India or from China, you may be in a tougher spot because there's going to be a bigger challenge to avoid some of the tariffs that are coming with that. So that's one thing. So global economic climate, the tariffs have been for everybody just a bit of a shift. But you want to manage it in a way. I mean, like I said, we've been looking at a lot of these things for a few years. The tariffs has expedited our urgency. However, you also don't want to go too far because, quite frankly, I don't know, things may shift again in 6 months or a year or 2 years. And so and honestly, just uplifting a factory and moving it to a different country, it takes a long time. It's very expensive. It's not always the best move, but if you have partners that can help you, where you can outsource or insource things in different geographies, that's really been for us the most meaningful thing and the most fast moving solutions that we could find.
So much change can be hard on the teams. I mean, like you said, there's a lot of effort needed, to assess, changes due to tariffs. You also mentioned, geopolitical conflicts. As a leader, how do you drive a culture of resilience and readiness for change?
It's a great question. And I don't think there's ever really a straightforward answer to. I mean, it's, first and foremost, you have to be an empathetic and present leader, I believe. And so, it's something where, for me, it's a personal commitment, I guess, that I have. I check in with nearly every member of my extended supply chain team at least once a month, whether that's a one-on-one or even a performance meeting where we're together, so that we have the FaceTime, we have the connection, we talk, and just to check in with people to see how they're doing. Because one of the other interesting elements of us is we are a hybrid organization today. I haven't really mentioned that before, but I'm based out here in Los Angeles, but we have people all over the country. We've post COVID, we've really morphed into a more hybrid organization versus a traditional in office type company. And in fact, our in office weeks are only once a month for 3 days. And so beyond that, and we're all kind of remote. And so it's even more important to stay connected and to stay up to speed with how people are doing, and ensuring that we are continuing to foster a culture of engagement and positivity. We do that through, like I said, straightforward things like meeting regularly, but making it a priority. We'll have events that are outside of even normal work stuff where we're engaging in a different way to try to make it fun, virtually and in person. It's important for us. And we've been intentional with how we plan budgets as well on an annual basis to have more in-person gatherings, where many of us are flying to do that on a handful of times over the course of the year. But that's probably a pretty straightforward answer, but it's so important. And then it's just checking in with people to see how are they doing, how are they feeling, how are you adjusting to things, and how can I as a leader help? That's my personal philosophy. How can I help you? It's not, I'm not here to tell you what to do, and that we need to make sure we're getting all this done, which is obviously important, but it's also how can I help you if there are challenges or if there's emotional things happening or whatever that is. And so that's a general principle for me.
When it comes to making decisions, and as you said, leading with empathy, when it comes time to like making those calls, do you have a framework that you follow?
Yeah, it's a good question. Directionally, I would say yes. I mean, it's not so structured and rigid that I have a checklist that, I'm like, well, let me pull out the old handy notebook and go through this to see, what the process is. I mean, I think of it in two ways, maybe. One, it's more of an annual planning process, an annual planning basis, maybe. So every year we have a strategic roadmap within supply chain that we said, okay, given the growth ambitions of the company, given the strategic directives of where we think our costs need to be, additional opportunities to drive new growth, new innovation. How does that stack up with what we should be focusing on in terms of improving cost or driving automation or investing in new systems and investing in new process? That's one part. So we kind of map that out at the beginning of every annual planning cycle, and then we kind of execute against it. And so we identify, providers, we identify owners, we identify solutions and tasks that have to go along with that, and then have checkpoints along the way that we make decisions on. Is this still a viable solution for us? Yes, no, based on some of the ROI conversation we had earlier, based on the solution we believe that it will deliver for our organization, and then we continue to proceed. And so it's not as structured maybe as that sounds, but there are regular check-ins on a quarterly basis where we're kind of assessing, okay, how are we stacking up to that annual strategy that we committed to and developed at the beginning of the planning process. And as we get closer to assessing the particular company or the particular solution or the particular ROI, that's really our decision point of like, yes, we're doing this, or yeah, maybe this doesn't make sense. So again, that's on a quarterly basis. That's fairly structured. And it, that's probably an oversimplified way to think of it. Like I said, I like to my bias is to be on the simpler side, but that's kind of how we do it from the annual side of things. From the more short term, those are things that are a bit less predictable, and that's very much less structured. But again, one of the this is a unique element of who we are as a company and how I manage the team and how I have a connection with my own boss, our CEO, and our mainly our CFO, but we are just quickly connected on any implementation decisions like, hey, should we shut the factory down? I mean, ultimately that would be my call. And I would just reach out to my CEO and say, this is the right thing to do or not. But we talk about it. But I also get the perspective of the teams in the trenches, right? So like I have a direct line to my factory director and quite frankly, the entire executive team. We have direct lines to each other, but we're very closely connected in that, which again seems pretty obvious, but we're just ready to be decisional. Mm-hmm. That's also what I love about working at Dollar Shave Club as a plug, compared to like my time at Unilever at SCJ. Like you think about huge organizations and, having to get 12 people to weigh in on something before a decision can be made, where here it's like, if I think it's the right thing because of what my people are telling me, because of the communication channels we have set up, we can make decisions in an hour, one way or the other, to either stay open, don't stay open, pivot to a different production strategy, whatever that is. So that's a much quicker element in terms of what we go through, which is a framework. And that's what you asked me. Not really, but it's more about an expectation we set and then we execute against. And then there's the annual planning process, which is a bit more structured. But anyway, that's kind of how I would think about it.
Yeah. And I can imagine being so communicative allows you to be flexible. So you can make those fast decisions because you've been in high communication. So if I could ask you about priorities. So where is Dollar Shave Club going? What are some of your priorities as you look out to the next few years?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we have a handful, as most organizations do. And I would say, so strengthening the base business that is always a priority. And so, as we think about being an OG direct consumer brand in the razor space, right? We like to say that we've kind of plateaued to a point where, the business economics, the direct consumer model, and today's crowded landscape is challenging to continue to grow at these astronomical levels, right? Because the cost of acquisition, the cost of acquiring new customers, and the cost of keeping those customers in the club for the minimum amount of time they need to be to return back, that it makes sense, right? The return on your investment. It's a constant challenge, which is why I keep talking about cost so much. Because if you think about it, our average order value, as I mentioned before, is like $10 or whatever, right? And so, the cost of acquiring new customers can sometimes exceed 70, $80. Okay, to acquire one new customer. And so you think about, all right, what do the economics look like that if I'm spending $80 to get somebody in the club and they're only ordering $10 at a time? Like, okay, that's tough economics to work through. You do it at scale, and you obviously have different price points. But the point is, growing that business in a profitable and smart way, but still growing that business is obviously a priority, which comes with just getting really good at execution, really good at taking costs out, partnering with our marketing and commercial teams to drive awareness, to drive trial, to drive new marketing strategies of how we come to life in the ecosphere, I guess, is always going to be a priority for us. And so that comes along with projects for us to look at new solutions across all those things. That's first and foremost one thing with the direct to consumer business. We also have a priority to continue to expand into retail. We're in retail today, as I mentioned, Walmart, we're in Target, we're in, some of the bigger companies, but we're not everywhere. And so obviously partnering with our sales team on the retail side to continue to come up with innovative solutions and interesting solutions for retail customers in particular. So like if we have products today, but maybe they're pretty good, but they're not as great as they could be because the value proposition isn't exactly where Costco might want it. So how can we as a supply chain continue to develop new products, new solutions at a better cost that are meaningful and interesting to companies like Costco to continue to drive growth and expansion into the retail channel? That's always going to be a priority. That is a current priority for us to continue the innovation pipeline cycle. But they being the rest of our org, really do look at us in supply chain, because part of my responsibility is also the R&D function, is what can we do? How can we continue to innovate, come up with new low cost, interesting solutions in this space, whether it's a new razor, a new electric product, a new shave aid, something you use that's different and differentiated, but at an OPP price point, because that's kind of who we are. It's in our name, which is a challenge, but like how can we continue to do that to sell more into bigger and more retailers? Priority 2. Priority 3 is also then just driving the general innovation roadmap and providing more breadth of products outside of just the core of what we do today through new ideations. We're actually hosting an innovation summit that I'm sponsoring, that we're just going to present all kinds of new ideas of new technology, new product formats to get our marketing and sales teams excited about what they think could be that next big thing for us that would then prompt more volume, more growth, more sales in the future. So that's another one. And then beyond that, our priority as an org, which we have a serious or significant part of playing a role in supply chain, is we're actually looking at, can we also start acquiring new businesses? So Dollar Shave Club today, obviously we're a shave company. We do have electrics. We have a core base of what I would say non-disposable razors and a bunch of shavings and personal care products. But even beyond that, since Nexus had acquired us, as you mentioned at the very beginning, we're now owned by Nexus Capital Management. They're interested in leveraging the success of our platform in terms of the cost that we can deliver and the service that we execute and deliver against. We've gotten pretty good at that. So they want that we're looking at, can we acquire new businesses that would make sense to bolt on with the Dollar Shave Club brand that can then be embedded into the organization and get more value out of that and drive more sales, more value, more overall success for the company. But with that comes with potentially standing up an entirely new supply chain network. And so we're preparing for that to say, okay, based on the space we have available, the capacity we have available, if we were to acquire another business, that's maybe another 50 to 100 SKUs and has this kind of footprint, can we do it within the current context of what we have in place today? Do we need new partners? So that's another priority that for sure will be significant over the next 2 to 3 years, which will be really interesting and pretty different from what we've done before. But I would say for those 3 or 4 things, it's kind of where the focus is for us over the next couple of years.
Nice. Okay, that sounds like a lot of growth underway. If I can ask you, as we're getting close to the end here, for advice. So as you are speaking with other executives, potentially other supply chain officers, what advice do you like to give?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I don't tend to think of myself as somebody who would give advice, because I feel like so many answers are so obvious. But I mean, at times we do tend to overcomplicate things about trying to keep up with all of the change in the industry with new technology, new solutions. And you mentioned earlier a word that I'm glad you mentioned, but the hype around AI as one example. At times we can overthink solutions to the particular problems we all might have in our own organizations. And I find, and again, some of this is because the nature of our business and the makeup and the complexity that we represent, but keeping things simple and really going through an annual planning process to develop a strategy that you're really focusing on two to three things maybe a year that really are going to drive meaningful value to your organization, that have a clear cut payback and a clear cut ROI, that truly will drive value that you can easily measure, whether it's a cost reduction, a service improvement, an inventory optimization, whatever that is, and structure your teams in a way that they can remain incredibly focused on delivering real results. And again, that may sound, duh, that's pretty obvious, but I do find, and again, I had a lot of personal experience in my first 16 years in industry with the other bigger guys, but like, you can get overwhelmed with trying to do too much. You like to say the phrase boiling the ocean. I just, for us, I would find, be very specific, be deliberate, be simple, identify what that biggest opportunity is, whether it's the cost or the efficiency or whatever, and then go out and be very deliberate with how do I position and focus the teams on really getting 2 or 3 key things delivered in any given year. And don't try to stretch too thin. Don't try to guide off too much. And really, do your research around what's out there and try to navigate through some of the hype for some of these other solutions that may or may not be a good fit for your business, but you think you should be looking at it because everybody's talking about it. But who knows, in a year or two, that might even not even be the buzzword anymore. So anyway, that would be my advice is like, I like to keep it simple, and it's really worked well for us.
I think that's great advice because it goes back to what you were talking about earlier too. Not only just staying simple, but when you're focused and targeted, you can do those little experiments and then learn and then apply and then really grow and scale. So I think it's great advice. Well, Justin, this has been such a great conversation. It's been a pleasure to learn from your experience from Dollar Shave Club, your leadership philosophy. As we wrap up, if anybody wants to get to know you more or Dollar Shave Club, where would you send them?
Yeah, you can reach out to me directly, justin.brown@dollarshaveclub.com. You can see our website. Please visit our website. Actually, it's dollarshaveclub.com. Check us out. We have a lot of new product offerings literally coming out right now that I think will be very interesting for people. But yeah, feel free to visit and please come join us.
Wonderful. Justin, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerrie. It's been a pleasure.
All right. That was Justin Brown, Chief Supply Chain Officer at Dollar Shave Club. And to everyone listening, thank you for being a part of the future of manufacturing.